I was actually just thinking about this the other day. Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of like absolute
Oh,
precision.
yeah. Like very clinical.
Right. It's almost like engineering. I mean, you fall off your bike, you break your arm, and you go to the doctor, and the x-ray shows that jagged white line right across the bone.
And the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is.
Exactly. Broken or not broken. It is deeply comforting in a way.
It really is. I mean, we like things to be visible. We like the world to be categorized into cause and effect that we can literally see with our own eyes.
Yeah, because you know the mechanics of the brake, and therefore you know the mechanics of the cast that will fix it.
Right.
But then, you step away from the human body and you look at the macro level, you step into the world of human history, and suddenly it feels like someone just took a sledgehammer to that x-ray machine.
Oh, completely. It gets so murky.
Right. We look at the rise and fall of nations, the total collapse of these, like, seemingly invincible empires, the sudden dawn of golden ages. And we tend to view it as completely random.
Yeah, we treat it like weather before meteorology existed.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
I mean, we look at a thriving civilization and we assume they just, hit the geographical lottery.
Yeah.
Or they just happen to get a charismatic leader at exactly the right time.
Just pure luck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when a society collapses, whether it's the Roman Empire or the Bronze Age collapse, we chalk it up to bad luck, uncontrollable tragedy, or, historically, some mysterious divine anger.
Right, the gods were mad.
Yeah. We assume there are no underlying mechanics. We assume there is no jagged white line defined.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the stack of research and the translations we are diving into today completely shatters that assumption.
It really does.
We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly profound, highly analytical reading of an ancient text. Specifically, we're looking at Surah Ibrahim, verses 6 through 12 from the Quran.
And I want to set the stage right now for you listening at home.
Yeah, please do.
If you are tuning in expecting a theological sermon, you might need to adjust your dial a bit.
Right.
Because we are moving entirely away from the realm of, like, religious fables or mythological storytelling today.
Which is such a refreshing approach.
It is perhaps the most crucial distinction we need to establish right at the onset. I mean, the analysis we are working through today treats these verses not as ancient mystical bedtime stories, but as a literal textbook of sociological physics.
Sociological physics. I was honestly obsessed with that phrase the minute I saw it in our notes.
It's a heavy concept.
It is. The fundamental premise of this text is just earth-shattering when you really let it sink in. It argues that succession, the expansion of societies, and the absolute ruin of nations is not a matter of luck.
No.
And it is not the result of a deity's random mood swings. It is a matter of law, capital L, law.
That's right. It's structural.
So what does it actually mean to view human history as an equation? I mean, if bringing humanity from darkness into the light isn't just some spiritual metaphor for feeling fuzzy inside,
Right.
but is actually a concrete political and economic blueprint, how does that change the way we look at our own society today?
That is the big question.
That is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to uncover the mechanics of how societies expand, how they stagnate, and the incredible friction that occurs when a systemic change is proposed.
And, to even begin to understand this blueprint, the source material introduces a foundational concept known as the Ayyam-e-Allah.
Which translates to the days of Allah, right?
Yes, literally the days of Allah. Now, the text goes out of its way to clarify that these are not literal 24-hour periods.
Right, like a Tuesday.
Exactly. When the historical figure of Moses reminded his people of these days, he wasn't pointing to a calendar. He was pointing to monumental historical turning points.
Epochs.
Yes, epochs, paradigm shifts.
These are the moments where the board just gets flipped entirely. The status quo is violently, undeniably disrupted.
That is a great way to visualize it. I mean, the Ayyam-e-Allah are those visible, undeniable moments in human history where the law of requital, which, by the way, we can think of as the universal law of cause and effect on a civilizational scale.
Okay, cause and effect.
Yeah, that law becomes glaringly manifest. It is when a long, grueling period of societal stagnation, exploitation, or oppression reaches its absolute breaking point.
That tipping point.
Right. The underlying laws of sociological physics finally assert themselves, causing the collapse of the corrupt system and the violent rise of a new paradigm.
So it's the moment the X-ray becomes visible to everyone?
Yes.
Like the arm has been fracturing for decades, maybe centuries, but this is the moment the bone actually snaps through the skin. You just can't ignore it anymore.
That is exactly it. And the source text uses the empirical historical example of Moses and Pharaoh to illustrate exactly how this law operates.
Okay, let's get into Pharaoh.
The text views Pharaoh not as like a cartoon villain, but as an archetype of an exploitative system.
Right.
But to understand how a society shifts toward the light of reason, we first have to thoroughly dissect the anatomy of the darkness they are trying to escape.
Let's get into that darkness because, we always hear about Pharaoh in this very theatrical way.
The Hollywood version.
Yeah. He is the guy with the heavy eyeliner yelling at slaves to build pyramids while holding a whip. But the source material breaks down Pharaoh's system of oppression in a way that is honestly chillingly calculated.
It really is.
It's not just about physical cruelty, right? It is a highly sophisticated socio-political strategy.
Well, what's deeply unsettling here is the linguistic breakdown of the oppression described in the text. I mean, the traditional translation that most people know talks about Pharaoh slaying the sons and letting the women live.
Which sounds horrific.
Oh, historically, people read that as a literal physical massacre of infants. But the author of our source text goes deeper into the Arabic root to uncover the sociological implications. The word used for slaughter here is thab. In a sociopolitical context, it does not mean lining people up and executing them.
Which makes sense logistically, right?
How so?
I mean, if you are a dictator, you don't actually want to kill off your entire labor force. You need them to build your economy. You need them to build the pyramids or whatever infrastructure.
Exactly. You need the workforce.
So what does thab actually mean here if it isn't literal murder?
It is much more insidious than murder. Thab here signifies rendering a demographic entirely ineffective.
Ineffective how?
It means systematically crushing the proactive, rebellious spirit of a subjugated people. It is about stripping away their courage, their self-respect, and what the text calls their protective intellect.
Wow.
If you humiliate a population enough, if you deny them access to critical education, if you prevent them from developing leadership qualities or organizing much,
then you have effectively slaughtered their potential as a threat to the ruling elite.
Precisely.
So you kill the sons by killing their ambition. You kill their capacity to be leaders. I'm trying to picture how this works in practice today. It is essentially a structural brain drain.
That's a perfect modern term for it.
You remove the critical thinkers, you punish any sign of independence, and you leave only those who are perfectly compliant. You keep the population alive just enough to serve the system, but you slaughter their capacity to govern themselves.
You're describing what we could call structural domestication.
Structural domestication.
Pharaoh's system was engineered to create an inferiority complex so deep, so multi-generational, that the oppressed people would eventually police themselves.
Like they internalize the oppression.
Exactly. They become devoid of the courage to stand up against injustice. And the real tragedy of this kind of darkness is that when a society is trapped in it for long enough, they don't even realize they are in chains anymore.
The chains just feel like reality.
Right. They adapt their entire culture around the trauma of subjugation.
That makes the task of freeing them infinitely harder. I mean, you aren't just fighting the dictator anymore.
No, you're fighting the psychology of the people.
You're fighting the psychological conditioning of the very people you are trying to save. Which brings us to a massive turning point in the text. And honestly, one of the most mind-blowing redefinitions I encountered in this deep dive.
Let me guess. The concept of Bala.
Yes, the linguistic pivot on the word Bala. This is where the sociological reading of the text really starts to diverge from the traditional theological reading.
It's a huge shift.
Because normally, if you hear the word Bala in these cultural traditions, it is translated as a calamity, a punishment, or some terrible disaster sent from the heavens.
Right.
Like an earthquake happens and people say, oh, they were hit with a great Bala. It's seen as a divine penalty. But the source completely deconstructs this, doesn't it?
It does. If we view history through the lens of the law of requital cause and effect, translating Bala merely as punishment completely misses the mechanics of what is actually happening.
Okay, so what is the root meaning?
The root meaning of the word Bala in classical Arabic is actually the turning over of conditions.
Turning over of conditions.
Right. It implies a drastic shift, a revolution of circumstances, and most importantly, it implies a test.
Okay, stop right there. A test. Not a punishment, but a test to reveal what is actually present in a society.
Exactly. Let's look at how the text applies it. When Moses finally leads his people out of this structural domestication we just talked about, the text refers to this massive shift, this liberation, as a great Bala from their sustainer.
Right?
Now, apply the traditional translation. If Bala means calamity, why on earth would liberation from slavery be called a calamity?
It makes zero sense.
None at all.
Congratulations, you are free. What a terrible punishment.
Right. But if Bala means a turning over of conditions or a profound test, then it makes perfect sense.
Because they have just been thrust from the predictable, structured darkness of slavery into the demanding, chaotic light of freedom.
Yes. That is a massive test of their character.
Because freedom requires responsibility. I mean, when you are a slave, your day is planned for you. You don't have to make macroeconomic decisions.
You don't have to build infrastructure or pass laws.
Exactly. When you are suddenly free, the turning over of conditions forces you to see if you actually have what it takes to survive.
And to illustrate why this test is necessary, the source provides a fascinating psychological anecdote.
Oh, I loved this part.
It is the story of an old, retired wrestler. I think it perfectly captures the human tendency towards self-deception.
The guy who thinks he's still a champion.
Exactly. The text describes this old wrestler who has long passed his prime. People in his village would occasionally tell him, you're getting older, you've lost your strength.
He's being realistic with him.
Right. And he would vehemently deny it. He would say, nonsense. I am just as strong as I was in my youth. The years haven't touched me.
Wow.
And he wasn't lying to them, He genuinely believed it himself. He'd constructed an entire psychological fortress to insulate himself from the reality of his aging body.
He's living in a state of total delusion, which is comfortable, honestly, as long as you never actually have to wrestle anyone.
Right, as long as you aren't tested. But one day, to prove his detractors wrong, he marches down to the local wrestling arena.
Okay.
And there's a massive, incredibly heavy stone in the corner of the arena that he used to lift easily when he was a young champion.
Like a training stone.
Yeah. He confidently walks up to it, strips off his outer garments, grabs the stone, and tries to heave it up. He pulls, he strains, his veins are popping, but the stone doesn't budge an inch. It is physically impossible for them.
So the illusion is shattered. I mean, he has to admit he's lost his strength, right?
Not at all.
No.
The human ego is far too resilient for that. He lets go of the stone, dusts off his hands, points at it, and says, see? The stone is stuck. It's wedged into the ground. That's why it won't move.
Oh, wow. That is so incredibly accurate to human nature.
Isn't it?
The mental gymnastics we will perform to avoid confronting our own weakness.
It is the absolute pinnacle of self-deception. And the author uses this anecdote to explain the true mechanism of Bala, why individuals and societies are tested by shifting conditions.
Okay, break that down for me.
The overarching law of requital doesn't test a society because the creator needs proof of their character.
Right, because the creator already knows.
Exactly. The sister itself already knows the reality. The test happens, the conditions are turned over, to pull humans out of their own psychological self-deception so they can see their actual state.
So it forces the society to look at the X-ray.
Yes.
You can keep walking around saying your arm isn't broken, but when the test comes, when you have to lift something heavy, like the responsibility of building a new nation reality asserts itself.
It forces the issue.
If Pharaoh's system kept the people in a delusion, the Bala, the test of freedom, forces them to see if they actually have the internal strength to build a functioning society.
Right.
Or if they are just going to point at the heavy stone of self-governance and say, well, it's stuck.
And historically, we see that many societies fail that exact test.
Yeah.
I mean, once a society experiences this turning over of conditions, once they are freed from the structural oppression of a pharaoh archetype, how do they ensure they don't fall right back into ruin?
Because historical turning points aren't just one-way tickets to utopia.
Definitely not. You can win a revolution, secure your freedom, and then completely squander it, collapsing into an even worse state.
Which is the perfect pivot to the core economic and sociological equations of this text. If history is governed by social physics, then a newly freed society needs to understand the specific laws that govern growth and decay.
Exactly.
And the text boils this down to two contrasting concepts, Shukr and Kufr.
This is where the text's linguistic analysis truly shines, I think, completely dismantling our modern colloquial understanding of these words.
Let's start with Shukr.
Okay. If you ask almost anyone today what shukr means, they will tell you it means gratitude. Passive, verbal gratitude.
Right, it's a feeling in your heart. Or a verbal acknowledgement to keep yourself humble. Like,
Yeah.
you lose your job, your car breaks down, but you sit there helplessly and say, well, I still have my health, so shukr. It's almost used as a coping mechanism for trauma or lack.
It is absolutely devolved into the term of passive resignation. But the source text traces the root of this word back to ancient classical Arabic idioms.
And what does it mean?
Well, the original physical imagery associated with the root of shukr is radically different from just saying thanks.
Okay.
The root actually refers to a camel whose udder is visibly full of milk.
Wait, a camel?
Yeah, a camel whose udder is actively producing and practically dripping with sustenance.
Hold on, a camel's udder full of milk. That is a highly specific, tangible image.
It is very specific.
That's not a fuzzy feeling of gratitude. That is a physical reality of overflowing resources. It is biological production.
It is entirely about actualized potential. What's fascinating is how the text translates this biological image into a sociological law.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Shukr is not passive gratitude. It is the engine of expansion.
The engine of expansion.
Yes, it means possessing talents, resources, and wealth, and actively actualizing them to their absolute maximum limit. It requires immense effort, strategy, and what the text calls sabr and shukur.
What does that mean?
Steadfast, unyielding perseverance and productivity.
I am still trying to wrap my head around this paradigm shift. You are telling me that in this text, gratitude is actually an economic multiplier?
Yes.
That completely removes it from the realm of personal theology and drops it right into macroeconomics.
Exactly.
I mean, if I have a resource, true shukr isn't me sitting in my room saying thank you for it. True shukr is putting that resource to work.
You have to utilize it.
If a society has brilliant engineers, shukr is funding them to build infrastructure. If a nation has vast tracts of fertile land, shukr is farming it, using the most efficient technology to feed everyone and export the surplus. It is active, persistent production.
You've captured the exact essence of it. The text states a profound, inviolable equation. If you utilize these resources properly, if you engage in this active shukr, the system will continuously increase them for you.
It is a law of social physics.
Yes, productivity breeds expansion. If you circulate wealth, build infrastructure, and educate your population, your society's capacity will mathematically grow. The milk will keep flowing, so to speak.
But wait, if that's the engine of expansion, what causes the collapse? Because nations don't just grow forever.
Right.
Empires fall. If shukr is production, what is the opposing force?
That brings us to the deconstruction of the second term, kufr.
Okay.
This is the mirror image. It's the force that brings the engine to a grinding halt.
But kufr is usually translated as disbelief or infidelity, right? Like it's used as a religious label.
Very commonly, yes.
If you don't adhere to a specific dogma, you are committing kufr.
That is how it is used today. But again, the author insists we look at the linguistic root to understand the sociological physics at play.
Okay, what's the root?
The root meaning of kufr is not disbelief in a deity. The root meaning is to hide, to cover up, or to bury something.
To bury something.
Yes. Think of a farmer burying a seed deep in the soil. That physical action of covering it up is the root concept of kufr. Now, apply that action to the macroeconomics of a society.
Oh, wow. If shukr is the act of circulation and production of resources, then kufr would be the hiding or hoarding of those resources.
Precisely. It is the friction of stagnation. And the source text uses a brilliant, highly relatable modern analogy to drive this home.
What is it?
The concept of white money versus black money.
Oh, this makes perfect sense. Let's trace that out. White money is legitimate capital that is actively circulating in the economy.
Right.
It's invested in businesses, it's deposited in banks where it can be loaned out, it's taxed by the state to build roads, it's out in the open, generating a yield, creating jobs.
And in the terminology of the text, that circulation of white money is an act of shukr.
Got it.
Now, contrast that with black money. What is black money? It is wealth that has been acquired illegitimately, or it's legitimate wealth that has been deliberately hidden off the books to avoid taxation.
And what do individuals do with black money? They hoard it.
Exactly.
Buy gold and bury it, or they lock it away in offshore accounts where it just sits dormant.
They take it completely out of circulation. The broader society cannot benefit from it. The government can't tax it to build schools. Entrepreneurs can't borrow it to start companies.
So they hide their wealth, they restrict access to resources, they build monopolies that stifle competition.
Yes, and that act of covering up, burying, and hoarding is the sociological definition of kufr.
This is a mind-bending reframing of these words. So disbelief isn't about what is in your head. It is about resource hoarding.
Yes, exactly.
When a society adopts Kufr, it isn't just that they have adopted the wrong theology. It is that they are economically and intellectually burying their potential.
Spot on.
The ruling elite hoards the capital. The corporations buy up patents and hide them to prevent innovation. Truth is covered up by the media to maintain the status quo. And when resources, whether capital, intellect, or truth, are buried, the society naturally, inevitably decays. The friction brings the engine to a halt.
It is a mathematical certainty. The breakdown of a society isn't a magical curse sent down from the heavens because people didn't perform the right rituals. It is the natural result of kufr, of taking wealth and truth out of circulation. The penalty for burying your societal potential is systemic stagnation and, eventually, total collapse. The physics demand it.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least ask the obvious question.
Go ahead.
If this is an objective law of sociology, and Kufr, this rebellious hoarding and stagnation, is so destructive to the fabric of reality, why doesn't the overarching system, the creator, or the law of requital just immediately strike down the perpetrators?
Right.
I mean, if you have a human king and his subjects start hoarding wealth and refuse to circulate capital according to his laws, the king gets furious. He sends the army, he burns down their houses, his ego is bruised, and he demands immediate retribution.
That's how a human works, yes.
So why does the text suggest the law of requital allows this friction to play out over decades or even centuries?
That is a phenomenal question. And the text addresses this exact psychological tension by contrasting the mindset of human dictators with the fundamental nature of the universal law itself. Okay. The author does a deep dive into the dictator's inferiority complex to explain why human rulers react with immediate violence.
Right. Think about Pharaoh. Why does an autocrat demand constant sycophancy? Why do they need massive statues built in their honor, daily parades, and absolute unquestioning obedience over every minor detail?
Because deep down, whether consciously or subconsciously, they know their power is inherently illegitimate.
It's all fake.
It is built on violence, coercion, and manipulation, not on intrinsic merit or natural law. Their entire authority is a remarkably fragile illusion.
They're terrified of the illusion breaking.
Exactly. If you disobey a dictator, even in a small way, if you fail to flatter them, they lash out with disproportionate, terrifying violence.
To make an example of you.
Why? Because your minor disobedience threatens the collective hallucination that keeps them in power. A human dictator has a fragile ego. They need your submission to feel powerful. They need your fear to validate their existence.
That the system of the creator, the underlying law of requital, operates on a completely different frequency.
Yes. The source text uses a specific Arabic phrase to describe this independence, Ghaniyun Hamid.
Ghaniyun Hamid.
It roughly translates to being absolutely independent and inherently praiseworthy. This represents a monumental paradigm shift regarding the nature of universal laws.
Okay, how so?
Well, if the entire population of the Earth, all 8 billion of us, suddenly decides to adopt kufr, if we all collectively decide to hoard our wealth, bury our talents, suppress the truth, and embrace total stagnation.
The law doesn't suffer from a bruised ego.
Not at all.
The creator doesn't sit on a throne feeling insecure because humanity isn't clapping for him.
No. The universe isn't threatened by our bad decisions.
This reminds me of the gravity analogy. I think about this whenever we discuss the immutability of physical laws.
Oh, that's a perfect parallel.
Gravity doesn't need us to flatter it. It doesn't need us to build grand temples to it or sing hymns about how powerful and heavy it is. Gravity just is.
Let's follow that analogy. What happens if we rebel against gravity?
Right. Imagine if humanity decides we are tired of gravity's oppressive rules. We hold a massive global summit, and we unanimously vote to stop believing in gravity. We adopt total kufr regarding gravity.
Okay.
To prove our independence, millions of people march up to the edge of a cliff and purposefully step off.
Does gravity feel insulted by this protest?
No, gravity doesn't say, "How dare you disbelieve in me, I shall smite you with my wrath."
Right.
Gravity doesn't have an ego. Gravity just keeps functioning exactly as it always does, with total, unyielding mathematical precision. Gravity doesn't care. We are just the ones who hit the ground. The consequence, the broken bones, and the tragedy belongs entirely to us.
That is the perfect illustration of Ghaniyun Hamid. The independence of the law means that the consequences of kufr, stagnation, or shukr, expansion, are baked into the very fabric of the universe.
They are inevitable.
Yes. When a society hoards its wealth and covers up empirical truth, the resulting economic collapse or civil war isn't a dictator lashing out in anger. It is simply the society hitting the bottom of the canyon after purposefully jumping off the cliff.
The law is independent. It doesn't need our praise to function. Our actions dictate our own trajectory.
Absolutely.
Okay, but this brings up a really dark reality about human history.
What's that?
If the consequences of ignoring the law of requital are so dire, if jumping off the cliff guarantees with 100% certainty that you will hit the ground and shatter, why do human societies keep doing it?
It is a bit baffling.
Why is history just an endless loop of empires rising, hoarding their wealth, suppressing the truth, and then collapsing?
That is the tragedy the text explores next. Historically, when these societies were accelerating toward the edge of the cliff, the text points out that they weren't left entirely without warning.
Right.
Messengers, historical figures like Noah, or the individuals sent to ancient Arabian nations like Ayat and Thamud, arrived to sound the alarm.
And according to this sociological reading, these messengers didn't just show up wearing robes and shouting magical threats about fire and brimstone.
No, the text specifically says they arrived with Bayyinaat.
Bayyinaat.
Yes, Bayyinaat translates to clear proofs, empirical evidence, or rational arguments. These messengers were essentially presenting the sociological physics we are discussing today.
They came with the data.
Exactly. They pointed to the engine of expansion and the friction of stagnation. They looked at the ruling elites and said, look at the data, look at the wealth disparity, look at the suppression of human potential. Your system of exploitation is mathematically unsustainable. You are walking toward a cliff.
But how does an exploitative society react when presented with the light of reason? You would hope that an advanced society would say, oh, wow, great data points. Let's form a committee, restructure our economy, and avoid the cliff.
But that never happens.
It never happens. The text in verse 9 describes their reaction with a very specific physical gesture. They put their hands to their mouths.
It's a fascinating physical description, and the author's interpretation of it moves past the literal. Putting hands to their mouths isn't just a sign of shock or a gasp of surprise.
What does it signify?
The text elaborates that this signifies organized censorship and aggressive boycotting. It is an active, highly coordinated effort by the establishment to silence the message.
Like a gag order.
Exactly. It means literally gagging the messenger or creating an environment where the message cannot possibly be broadcast.
It is the ancient equivalent of what we see constantly today. It's deplatforming, algorithm suppression, media blackouts, or burying dissenting research.
Nothing has changed.
The ruling elite realize instantly that if the masses hear these clear proofs, if they understand that the system is rigged and mathematically doomed, the illusion of their authority will shatter. So the immediate reaction of the establishment isn't to debate the facts in the public square. Their first instinct is a complete gag order.
What's even more revealing is a behavioral pattern the source notes about who enforces this censorship. It describes the alliance of the corrupt.
The alliance of the corrupt.
In any given exploitative society, you will inevitably have various factions. You'll have different political parties, rival religious sects, competing corporate monopolies, and normally, under everyday circumstances, these groups fight each other constantly.
Right, they're always at each other's throats trying to grab a slightly larger slice of the pie.
But watch what happens the moment a purely rational, systemic truth is presented. A truth that threatens the foundational monopoly they all rely on to exploit the masses.
They unite.
Instantly. The bitterest enemies suddenly become the closest of allies to silence the light of reason.
That is wild.
The religious establishment, the political autocrats, and the economic monopolists pool their resources to put their hands over the mouth of the messenger. Because while they may disagree on how to divide the spoils, they all agree that the system of exploitation itself must be protected at all costs.
It is wild to think about, but we see this throughout history. When a scientist first proposed that washing hands could save lives in hospitals, Ignaz Semmelweis, I think his name was, the medical establishment didn't say, fascinating hypothesis, let's run a clinical trial.
Right, they didn't welcome it.
No, they ostracized him, they mocked him, they essentially drove him insane because his empirical truth threatened their self-image as infallible healers. It threatened their authority.
It threatens their power, and it induces a deeply uncomfortable psychological state described in the text as shak and marib.
Shak and marib.
Now, shak is the standard Arabic word for doubt, but marib goes much deeper. It means a disquieting, unsettling, deeply disturbing kind of doubt. The opponents complain that the messenger's new system puts them in a state of marib.
Why is it so deeply disturbing to them? I mean, why does the truth make them feel literally sick?
Because the truth violently disrupts their comfortable delusions. Think back to the old wrestler.
Right.
If you force him to confront the indisputable fact that he cannot lift the stone, you aren't just winning an argument, you are destroying his entire identity.
Wow.
For the ruling elite, an empirical truth that exposes their system as corrupt and doomed isn't just a difference of opinion. It is an existential threat to their psyche, their legacy, and their bank accounts.
Because ignorance is heavily incentivized when your entire wealth depends on the structural domestication of others.
Exactly. The Marib, the disquieting, nauseating doubt, is the cognitive dissonance they feel when the light of reason starts piercing through their carefully constructed darkness.
That cognitive dissonance is powerful, but what happens when censorship fails? Because gag orders don't work forever.
No, they don't.
Eventually, the message permeates the society. People start whispering about the clear proofs. When that happens, the opponents switch tactics. If they can't silence the message, they attack the messenger's humanity and retreat into the comfort of tradition.
This is a classic, almost predictable sociological maneuver. And the text outlines their argument perfectly in verse 10. The opponents look at the messengers who are offering this rational blueprint for a better society, and they say, Bashru and Mithluna, you are just humans like us.
Which, on the surface, seems like a really weird insult, right? Like, hey, you eat food and walk around, you're just a normal guy. Why is pointing out someone's humanity a defense against a rational mathematical argument?
To understand the brilliance of this defense mechanism, we have to look at what the author calls the human savior complex.
Okay, what is that?
This is a profound psychological insight into the masses. Exploitative societies, deep down, actually want their leaders or their saviors to be magical, supernatural, or superhuman.
Wait, really? Why would the oppressed want a magical leader? Shouldn't they want someone relatable?
Think about the mechanics of systemic change. If your leader is a normal human being who brings a rational blueprint for an economy, what does that mean for the followers?
Well, it means the followers have to do some work.
Exactly. It means the followers have to take personal responsibility. They have to put in the grueling, mundane, exhausting hard work of systemic reform. They have to change their habits, enforce laws, and build institutions. But if the leader is a demigod, an angel, or a magical being...
Oh, wow, I see it. If the leader is magical, the followers are totally off the hook.
Exactly. They don't have to do any heavy lifting. They can just worship the leader, perform a few symbolic rituals, and wait passively to be miraculously saved. The demand for a supernatural savior is fundamentally a demand for zero intellectual or physical effort.
That is an incredible insight. So when a messenger comes and says, here's the sociological blueprint, now we all have to roll up our sleeves, distribute wealth fairly, and build a new system, the people rebel against the work.
Yes, they do.
They point and say, we don't want a blueprint, we want magic. You eat food and walk in the markets just like us. You get tired, you're just a human. If you were really bringing salvation, you just snap your fingers, destroy the dictator, and give us a utopia without us having to sweat for it.
Precisely. Acknowledging the messenger's humanity means acknowledging the reality of the grueling work required to build a society. It shatters the illusion of a passive rescue.
Right.
And when your just human argument fails to fully deflect the truth, the opponents pull out their ultimate impenetrable shield, the shield of tradition.
The shield of tradition.
They argue, you want to turn us away from what our ancestors worship.
The ultimate intellectual cop-out. We can't change the economy, we've always done it this way.
The author deconstructs this brilliantly. Traditionalists inevitably hide behind ancestry because it acts as a perfect psychological defense mechanism against the light of reason.
How so?
Think about what reason demands. Reason demands radical, uncomfortable change. It demands that you reevaluate your monopolies, admit your biases, and tear down your corrupt economic structures. Tradition, on the other hand, demands absolutely nothing but replication.
It's the friction of stagnation all over again. It's Kufr. It is burying the potential for a better future under the dead habits of the past. It is amazing how these arguments combine. They essentially say, we won't follow you because you're normal, and we won't adopt your system because it is new.
It's the perfect recipe for avoiding all responsibility.
They weaponize nostalgia to avoid the terrifying work of building a better future.
And they don't stop there. They demand proof on their terms. They tell the messengers to bring a Sultan Numbibin, a clear, overwhelming authority.
But they don't mean data, do they?
No. In their minds, this is often interpreted as a demand for a miraculous sign or an immediate display of physical dominance. They're essentially saying, if your system is so great, don't give us equations, force us to believe it, show us a magic trick, or summon an army and conquer us right now.
They want the jagged white line on the X-ray to glow in the dark and sing a song.
Yeah.
So how do the messengers respond to these bad faith demands? I mean, when the crowd is demanding magic tricks and demanding that they conform to the ways of their ancestors, do the messengers try to pretend they are magical? Do they try to appease the traditionalists?
Not for a second.
Oh.
They respond with pure, unyielding empirical mastery. They completely embrace their humanity. They look at the crowd and say, yes, we are human beings just like you. We don't have a magic wand. We don't have wings.
Wow.
Instead of claiming supernatural powers, they claim a vastly superior rational system of life. They clarify that their insult, the revelation they bring, is a bestowed responsibility from the Creator. It is not a parlor trick they earn through meditation, and it's not a political platform they invented for self-promotion. It's an objective truth of the universe that they are obligated to share.
They refuse to play the mystical game. They are essentially saying, I can't conjure gold from thin air to make you rich, but I have the equations for an economy that won't mathematically collapse in 20 years if you're actually willing to do the work to build it.
Exactly. They ground everything back in the underlying law of requital. And this leads us to perhaps the most transformative, radical concept in the entire source text.
Okay, what is it?
The absolute redefinition of the word tawakkul.
Tawakkul. Let's spend some time here, because this is a word you hear all the time in these cultural contexts.
Oh, constantly.
It is almost universally translated as trust in God or reliance on God.
Yeah.
And again, much like the word shukr, historically it has been interpreted in an incredibly passive way.
Very passive.
It's the ultimate let go and let God mentality. Like, I'm not going to lock my door tonight. I have tawakkul that I will be protected. Or I'm not going to study for this university exam. I have tawakkul.
Yes, it has been tragically weaponized as an excuse for inaction and laziness. But the text pulls tawakkul far, far away from the idea of passive waiting. The author provides a striking analogy to explain what true systemic tawakkul actually looks like in practice.
Oh.
The analogy of the farmer.
This analogy blew my mind. Let's walk through it.
Imagine a farmer who wants a massive harvest of wheat. Can that farmer sit in his living room, refuse to plow the field, refuse to buy the seeds, look out at the barren dirt and simply say, I have tawakkul, I trust the Creator will give me a harvest?
No, he'd starve to death. We would look at that man and say he isn't demonstrating trust, he is demonstrating clinical delusion.
Exactly. True tawakkul requires intense, active engagement with the physical laws of the universe. The farmer must go out into the sun, he must plow the hard earth, he must carefully select the right seeds.
He has to put the work in.
He must plant them at the exact right time of the season, water them consistently, and build fences to protect them from pests. He puts in grueling, back-breaking, exhausting labor for months. And then, only after he has done absolutely everything within human capacity to align his actions with the laws of agriculture, then he has tawakkul.
So the trust comes after the work.
Yes. He has absolute, unshakable confidence in the natural laws of cause and effect that will produce the crop. He trusts the physics of the seed, the soil, and the water. He knows that if he does his part, the universe is designed to respond.
That is such a powerful paradigm shift. Tawakkul isn't a replacement for action. It is the deep psychological confidence you possess after taking the correct action.
Exactly.
It is the certainty that if you input the right causes, the system is objectively designed to give you the correct effects.
The source provides another brilliant, very modern analogy to drive this concept home. The analogy of the highway signpost.
Oh, I like this one too.
Imagine you are driving a car and you see a massive green highway signpost pointing to your destination. It says City Center, 50 miles this way. Do you pull your car over to the side of the road and doubt the sign? Do you sit in your car and wait for a magical voice from the sky to confirm that the sign is accurate?
No, you just keep driving. You follow the signpost with confidence. You trust the infrastructure that put the sign there.
Precisely. The Creator's laws, the sociological physics outlined in these ancient texts, are the highway signposts. They tell you exactly how to get to a thriving, expanding society. True tawakkul is putting your foot on the gas pedal and driving the car along the path indicated by those laws without second-guessing the infrastructure of the universe.
So tawakkul isn't folding your hands, closing your eyes, and hoping for a miracle. It is total active alignment with permanent values. It makes me think of an engineer building a massive suspension bridge. You
Yeah.
don't just throw some steel over a river and hope it holds up. You calculate the load, you understand the tension, you pour the concrete deep into the bedrock. You trust the physics because the physics are a constant.
Yes.
You have tawakkul that gravity and structural mechanics will hold the bridge up because the law of requital that Ghani and Hamid, the independent law of the universe, does not fail.
That is a phenomenal way to synthesize it. The messengers were essentially engineers telling the traditionalists, we don't need to show you magic because we have completely aligned ourselves with the fundamental laws of sociological expansion.
We have planted the seeds.
Yes, we have planted the seeds of a just society. We are doing the grueling work of plowing the socioeconomic field. And because we're doing the work, we have absolute tawakkul that our system will eventually, inevitably displace your corrupt, stagnant system. Not by magic, but by the unavoidable friction of your kufri, your hoarding and stagnation crashing against the unstoppable engine of our shukr.
This completely changes how I view these historical narratives. It is not a fairy tale of good guys with magic staffs fighting bad guys with chariots. It is a literal clash of systems. It is the physics of civilization playing out in real time. It's the engine of expansion colliding with the friction of stagnation.
It is the ultimate diagnostic x-ray of human history, finally turned on and functioning perfectly.
Okay, we need to bring all these massive macro-level concepts back down to earth, back to the listener's daily life. Because if human history is a sociological equation, then we aren't just observing it. We are the active variables in that equation right now, today.
We absolutely are.
Think deeply about the concepts we've unpacked in this deep dive. Think about Shukr as the engine of expansion. Are you actively using your talents, your capital, and your resources for the maximum benefit of the people around you? And think about Kufa as the friction of stagnation. Are you hoarding your wealth, burying your potential, or hiding behind the comfortable lies of self-deception?
The application of this text is immediate, and it is profound. We have to ruthlessly evaluate our own environments, our corporate workplaces, our political systems, and our own personal habits. Are we participating in the structural domestication of others? Are we contributing to the friction of stagnation?
And when we are confronted with empirical truth, when someone shows us the data that demands we change our comfortable traditional habits, what is our first reaction? Are we physically putting our hands over our mouths? Are we silencing the messengers and unfollowing the people who challenge us?
It's a tough question to ask ourselves.
Are we retreating behind the shield of tradition, saying, well, this is just the way things have always been done, purely to avoid the grueling, sweaty work of planting the wheat? Or are we seeking the light of reason? Are we practicing true active tawakkul, aligning our actions with permanent, objective values and trusting the sociological physics to yield a better future?
These are the exact questions that determine whether a society or an individual is moving toward the light of expansion or decaying into the darkness of collapse. And the incredible tension we discussed today, the messengers presenting the rational blueprint and the traditionalists fighting back with censorship and demands for magic, this is just the buildup.
Oh, yeah. We have to give a teaser for what comes next.
Yeah.
Because the source material doesn't stop with this argument. In the upcoming narrative in Surah Ibrahim, specifically when we get into verses 13 through 23, this clash of systems that we've been tracking today reaches an absolute violently boiling point.
The friction becomes mathematically unsustainable. The next section of the text explores the ultimate, inevitable displacement of the exploitative system by the productive one. When the laws of social physics reach critical mass, the Ayyam-e-Allah, those days of paradigm, shift finally and fully manifest.
Wow.
The old structure collapses completely under its own weight, and the new paradigm forcefully takes root.
It's the moment the old corrupt bridge finally snaps and falls into the river, and the new one opens for traffic. I cannot wait to dive into that with you. But for now, I want to leave everyone listening with a lingering thought. A final question to mull over as you watch the news, as you look at the economy, and as you observe the world around you.
Or what is it?
If the days of Allah are not magical random events, but rather historical epochs where the law of requital violently resets the board, looking at the extreme friction, the massive hoarding of wealth, and the deep systemic stagnation in our global systems today, are we currently living through the quiet, unsettling moments right before a new day dawns?